Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of Sunday, June 29th, 2025. Today, we have a fascinating and in-depth conversation in store for you about our continuing efforts to build a political coalition that will consist at first of the U.S. Transhumanist Party and the U.S. Pirate Party, but hopefully will extend to other minor political parties as well as we seek to make inroads into American politics and challenge the depredations of the duopoly. So joining us today is our panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers, including our current Vice Chairman and Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our Director of Citizen and Community Science and 2024 U.S. Vice Presidential Candidate, Daniel Tweed, and our Director of Publication, Zach Richardson. And joining us, our special guest for today is Drew Bingaman, who is the chairman or captain of the United States Pirate Party. So welcome, Drew. This is our second salon with the U.S. Pirate Party. Our first Virtual Enlightenment Salon took place on December 15th of 2024, and we had Jolly Mitch Davilo of the Illinois Pirate Party joining us for a fascinating conversation. Unfortunately, Mitch is unable to join us today, but we hope to see him later this evening when we meet with the U.S. Pirate Party as part of your regular meeting. So thank you, Drew, for being our guest today. Tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to be the captain of the U.S. Pirate Party, as well as how you see the U.S. Pirate Party's activities and hopes for the future.
Wow. I've been a long-time independent political activist. I've been involved in local and state level and national level libertarian politics. I was part of the Libertarian Party for a long time until I was essentially made persona non grata in 2022 by the fascist takeover of that party. So at that point, I decided to find another party that met with my principles, and I found the Pirate Party. I joined up. I helped build up and get the Pennsylvania Pirate Party going, and became a member of the PNC. And then from there, we had an election, and I was nominated and was elected to captain. So that's my story in short. Yeah. So if anybody wants to be out there and check out the United States Pirate Party or join us online, we have a Discord server. You can find that at uspirates.org/join. Yeah, the about page will give you some information about just tell you about us. I like to advocate that people go and do their own research and find and check us out and see what we're all about.
Yes, thank you very much, Drew, and we will put up that link to join the U.S. Pirate Party shortly. Now, it's interesting because I myself have been involved in libertarian politics, mostly small L libertarian, though I have had some contact with the capital L Libertarian Party. I even made a small three-figure donation to them in 2016 before I became the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. What often disappointed me about the Libertarian Party was that it was ripe for multiple waves of political takeovers by, let's say, ideologies or interests or political tribes that are not actually libertarian, but we're seeing the Libertarian Party as a kind of opportune vehicle to hijack. And I've said before, I didn't leave the Libertarian Party so much as the Libertarian Party left me. And it seems that you had a similar experience. And I've observed a lot of fractiousness within the Libertarian Party as well.
Yeah. Yeah. My exit from the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania specifically was a lot more active on their part. But yeah, when you have the largest third party out there, one with ballot access or relatively easy ballot access, which is that's what they had. They became a big target, and moneyed interests came in to fund the takeover, and it's really hard to fight that, especially when they get a lot of zealots behind them. So.
Yes. And of course, quite infamously, during the most recent Libertarian convention, when the Libertarian Party invited Donald Trump and RFK Jr., who was still running for president at that time, to speak ahead of the actual Libertarian Party candidates who were competing for the nomination. And then the Libertarian Party leadership tried to push a none of the above option through 7 rounds of ranked choice voting. Ultimately, it came down to a match between Chase Oliver, who did end up winning the Libertarian nomination, and none of the above. But Chase Oliver won it by about 60% to 40% for none of the above. He received only half-hearted support from the Libertarian Party infrastructure, and essentially, if none of the above had won, the Libertarian Party would have ceased to be a viable political force, and it would have implicitly capitulated to Trump. And of course, Trump co-opted RFK into his administration, and Trump was making promises to the Libertarian Party, but really the only promise that Trump fulfilled, because it was a fairly easy promise for him to satisfy once he became president, was to pardon Ross Ulbricht. But that was a single individual, and I know a lot of libertarians were passionate about freeing him, but nonetheless, is it worth it to relinquish the integrity of an entire political organization with a 53-year history to have that one concession be made to them, because all of the other promises that Trump made were essentially empty words?
Yeah, I don't think so. And I think a lot of the, once that takeover happened, a lot of the good people in the Libertarian Party were just too naive. I think they didn't recognize that these were bad faith actors that had come in to take over, because they would lie, and they would cheat, and they would steal. And we actually found that out too recently, that the chair that they put in basically has stolen all of the money that they had left. And so the Libertarian Party at this point is in a massive shambles. There are some people that are trying to scrape up the pieces, but the Trump thing was one of the biggest disappointments for me. I thought they'd never bring him in. I heard rumblings of things that they might be looking at doing that. And honestly, if it was a quid pro quo, basically, for freeing Ross, it's not worth it. It's not worth it for those people, that the libertarians that got talked into voting for Trump, and talked out of voting for Chase Oliver. It's not worth it. Not to have who we got now. So.
Libertarians. Yes, I completely agree with you. And I do wonder, since we've both had the experience of observing the dysfunction in the Libertarian Party ranks, what lessons have you taken away from that in terms of your leadership of the US Pirate Party? What kinds of structures, protocols, incentives can prevent that from happening in another minor political party. Perhaps one protection that we have is each of our organizations is smaller, so some of these political operatives might not consider us sufficiently lucrative targets yet. But of course, as we remain active, as we continue to grow, as we hopefully attract people because of the integrity of our ideas and how we operate, perhaps those attempted takeovers will become more frequent. So what kinds of safeguards are you thinking about or have you implemented to make sure we don't suffer the fate of the Libertarian Party?
Well, so far, I don't think we haven't really implemented too much in that, other than vigilance, because as everybody knows, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, and a lot of people have been asleep at the wheel. So um, that's our main defense right now, is just vigilance. We have had some questionable members come into the Pirate Party. We've had some people that don't quite understand how we operate. We stand on our principles. We practice our principles, and we've had some people also that want to pull us away to another project, that their personal project, those sort of things. Mostly, we've been able to handle it well as a board. I think so far, keeping the PNC solid, with solid pirates, has been most important so far. Down the line, we grow. I think we'll definitely need to put some safeguards in place to protect the integrity of our principles and our core values. So that's what's most important as a pirate, is our core values. All the other platform stuff is definitely secondary, but it goes hand in hand with our core values. So the core values are the number one thing that we need to protect and stand for. So
Yes, and the core values of the U.S. Pirate Party play a similar role to the three core ideals of the U.S. Transhumanist Party that we ask anybody who seeks to join us as a member about whether they agree with those core ideals. And if they don't agree, we try to delve further into that. So it's not an automatic rejection, but we seek to understand what is it that they disagree with. Is it just a nuance of the wording, or is there something more fundamental? But nonetheless, the core ideals are immutable for the USTP, and they are essentially longer lasting than the specific provisions of the platform, which could be voted on and potentially revised from time to time. But yes, it is very important to have a center of values that an organization adheres to through a lot of change, including changes in the external environment, changes in leadership, and of course, changes in membership as it grows over time. So, in regard to the external environment, we've had a lot of turbulence in American politics recently, to say the least. And I am hoping to get some of your thoughts as to events, especially in the past half year since we had our first salon with Mitch. How do you see the American political landscape since that time? And how do you anticipate the Pirate Party responding? And what would you hope from an alliance with other minor political parties in terms of how we address these strange and tumultuous times we live in?
oh boy, that's a big one. I see the United States Pirate Party and this coalition, to put it that way, this coalition should be building the new left, is how I see it. The Democratic Party has completely failed. The Republican Party isn't even a party anymore. They're just whatever Trump says. So the major political parties have failed. We just spoke about the Libertarian Party and how it is a shambles as well, and a shadow of its former self. Um, the American political system right now is an absolute nightmare, and somebody needs to step up and build a group of people that are willing to stick together for their principles and actually work in good faith to bring prosperity to the United States back, to bring bring living wages back, to support labor, to stay out of some of these ridiculous foreign entanglements that cost us trillions of dollars over the last 50 years. I think that's really what I see this coalition. We can maintain our individual party identities without having to go to one party, but we can combine resources, especially when it comes to things like ballot access, which I have a decent amount of experience with, and it is very tough for third parties to get ballot access, and that's ultimately one of the things that is really stacked against us right now as third parties is ballot access. There's very few states where it's easy. Lots of places at the local level it's not too bad, but once you get to state and federal elections, it can be near impossible and oftentimes costs a lot of money. So possible combining of resources for fundraising too, because it costs money to run a political party. Yeah, all those things.
Yes, indeed. And ballot access has definitely been a challenge in the manner you describe. We have in our YouTube chat Jennifer Hughes, who ran as a mayoral candidate in 2021 for Camden, New Jersey. And she didn't have that high of a signature threshold to clear. She had, I think, a little over 100 signatures that were required. The Secretary of State's office in New Jersey counseled her to get twice as many, and she did. She went door to door and personally collected these signatures by hand. It was quite a valiant effort. But what happened then was quite a bit of machination from the Democratic Party, which had dominated the politics of Camden for generations. And what happened was the incumbent mayor, the essentially interim mayor, was running to be the permanent mayor, but he didn't want to get his hands dirty. So one of his functionaries within the Democratic Party, who was also a primary challenger, but he lost the Democratic primary, and he came in as an independent, as another independent candidate, and he essentially did the dirty work of challenging the petition signatures that Jennifer had gathered under some bogus allegations like, oh, this person doesn't live in this area, even though the address was clearly from the area. So the Secretary of State's office, fortunately, was objective and upheld the majority of the signatures that were challenged. So Jennifer ended up getting onto the ballot, but it was an extra step to defend those signatures. And it's definitely a lot of extra work to get that buffer quantity of signatures in anticipation of a challenge. So that was one of the episodes that taught me how the duopoly doesn't play fair, even when someone tries to surmount the obstacles that they put into the law. They still do not play fair with that individual. They still try to find ways to disqualify a challenger.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things, and both parties do it. Don't think that's just the Democrats. Both major parties do that, and that's why the advice is usually to get double or at least 50% extra, because almost inevitably you will get some of those signatures stricken, even if it's just a formality on the form. In Pennsylvania, it's not the Secretary of State that handles that. We actually go to court to fight over it. So if you really want to defend yourself, you're going to need a lawyer. And I've been present at places where we usually go pro se because we're a minor political party and we don't want to waste our resources in court. But I've seen a lot of judges too that just they don't even want to bother with this stuff, and they basically are ready to throw them out. They're ready to throw it out, and you know, you don't get ballot access. And yeah, it's a lot of, the system has been created so that we have to burn all of our resources just getting on the ballot, and we have nothing left to run the campaign. We don't have money left. We don't have people left to run a campaign because we burn all of our resources getting just on the ballot. And I think that's wrong. I think we need a much more open ballot system in this country. Um, and there's tons of reform that needs to happen there. And that's a state by state issue. And yeah, it's miserable. That's those are the biggest, that's the biggest hurdle that we all have as independents and third parties.
Yes, I agree. To me, the ballot access hurdle has been huge because a lot of people who are uninformed about the problems think, well, the only serious political parties are the ones that make it onto the ballots, and they don't realize how much time and expense are involved, because one can't even just do an online campaign for signature gathering. Arizona is the only state that allows any kinds of petitions to be collected online, and only for 50% of the eligible signatures. For the other states, one has to get onto the ballot the old-fashioned way, through gathering petition signatures by hand. I remember during the COVID lockdowns, pretty much no state lifted those requirements, even though it was effectively illegal to be outside petitioning. And that, I think, hampered a lot of minor political parties as well. But what I wonder is, do you see any low-hanging fruit in this regard? Any areas where the system is not as locked down, where it's possible to still make inroads?
Yeah, generally I see a lot of things in generally in local elections. Those are usually elections in your city, your town, your township, your, you know, your local community. Most of the time, the bar for getting signatures is 5, 10, 25. In my city, similar to the Camden race, it was 100. I ran for city council in my town about 10 years ago, um, and it was a lot of door knocking to get that 150, 175 signatures. Um, but yeah, the low hanging fruit is definitely local elections. The lowest in my precinct, 3 out of the 4 of us are elected um, uh, elections officials. So I'm actually a constable. I do, basically, that means I'm the security, the law enforcement, aside next to the judge of elections. Uh, and I only need 10 signatures to get on the ballot when I'm up. So, and all those positions are pretty easy to get on the ballot for. Those are also positions that a lot of people don't run for. And that's another thing that you can look at, is once you have a primary, many times independents have a later window to get onto the November ballot. So you can watch and see what doesn't have a Democrat or a Republican. Oftentimes, in an area where one party has a relative lock, a lot of times the other party doesn't put a candidate in because they don't want to even bother with wasting the resources. So a lot of times an independent can make a big splash just by getting on the ballot against either a Republican or a Democrat incumbent and challenging them. And you can really get a lot of free press that way, especially if you're the only one that's challenging that person. And that's a good way to utilize the free press. Once you're on the ballot, you are a legit candidate, and utilize all of the free media that you can get, because it's invaluable.
Yes, absolutely. And I do encourage people to run for office as independents, or as transhumanists, or as whatever you can get on the ballot as officially, because that does provide the opportunity for free publicity. And I think Jennifer's race was great in that regard in Camden, because she was covered by the local newspapers once she was on the ballot. That provides a whole new level of visibility to a new demographic of people who might not have even heard of that minor political party before, or heard of those political ideas before. Now, Zach, you mentioned that there's a bill in Indiana, House Bill 1365. If you would like to discuss that a bit and what it proposes to do to perhaps help minor political parties.
Yeah, I guess I didn't look at it too much. So Jason in our party occasionally posts a newsletter that's like a ballot access newsletter. And several times on it, I've seen this rep, Ryan Dvorak, mentioned, and he tends to push forth more ballot access stuff to get more diversity. Um, One initiative I was thinking would be interesting for us is just a thank you letter for him from us for putting forth the effort for that as someone that is running as a Democrat, to be able to say, look, I want to hear everybody's voice. I'm not here to just lock us into this two-party thing. Anybody that wants a party, let's get them in there and compete on our ideas. So reading through the bill, it looks like it brings it down from 2,500 votes to 250 votes, or even less if you have a very small district. Let's see.
Yes,
Yeah,
so
main thing just ballot access. Yeah, reduce the threshold to be able to get on the ballot.
it reduces the signature requirements for independent or minor party petition nominations, allowing candidates to qualify with 250 registered voter signatures or 2% of the total votes cast in their election district, whichever is less. So this allows for easier access to minor political parties. And then what counts as a major political party also has a reduced barrier to it. So the barrier would now be getting more than 2,500 votes statewide, or in districts with 500 or fewer total votes, receiving more than 250 votes or having the highest vote totals. So I think this is a good bill. I think it does increase the probability that a party might become major according to state law, and that allows for some more sustained ballot access in many respects. And then the bill sponsor is Ryan Dvorak, who is a Democrat. What is interesting is Indiana is a heavily Republican state, and my experience has been that the dominant political party in a given state always opposes competition from minor political parties. The other political party in a state that's heavily red or heavily blue might be receptive to some independent political parties and some challengers, because they know that by themselves they will not unseat the dominant political party, but perhaps another party coming in could provide an alternative vision that would resonate with the voters in that state. So I would say,
I'm so thinking, here I am thinking this guy's, oh, he's so kind and generous. He wants to help us out. Now Gennadi's laying it down that he's just scheming away how to unseat the Republicans. And I'm, oh man, okay. But it's still, good bill.
yes, it is a good bill. And sometimes our allies are going to be purely pragmatic allies where they have their own agendas, but as part of their agendas, elevating minor political parties may be instrumentally useful to them. And I would say, from our standpoint, let's take whatever chances we can get. If that means our parties will be more likely to be on the ballot, our candidates will be more likely to be on the ballot, what we get from this is being able to spread our messages and our ideas. And at least those kinds of pragmatic politicians may be willing to work with us whether our candidates get elected to office or whether we're just an active political presence and we have certain proposals, we have certain measures, legislation that we support or oppose, they might listen to us. So that is also, I think, a promising approach to consider. But Drew, what do you think of these kinds of dynamics where sometimes a major political party might see us as instrumental allies?
I think there are a lot of cases in which the minor political parties can be allies with the major party on issues, on certain issues. I mean, obviously there are things that each of our parties agrees with one of the major parties, as our platform goes. One of the things that I see too as a viable option, not everybody agrees with me on this, but a lot of times, especially at the local or at the state rep level, somebody that is not necessarily one of us can register as one of the major parties and run in the primaries against one of the, either the Democrats or the Republicans. We call it the Rhino Dino strategy. So you're a Republican or a Democrat in name only. And there are a lot of people, and because I see this because I do work elections, there are a lot of people that just come in and vote for their team. And I've seen it too over the past 10 plus years of being involved in Pennsylvania politics anyways, how difficult it is, even when you're in a head-to-head race with an unpopular state rep, you can still only pull 20% because half of the people that are registered in the other party don't even look at you. If you're not registered in that party, they won't even look at you. I think there is a large swath of people that are looking to vote for independents just because they're independents. So that is also something to consider. Ultimately, you need to look at each race and work up the strategy that you think is best. I think there's a lot of ways that third party and alternate candidates can really make a splash and get names and ideas out there that are not in the mainstream right now, and bring politics back to things where we can actually have the people have a real role again instead of this duopoly oligarchy.
Yes, indeed. And it's interesting that you mentioned the Rhino Dino strategy because it seems to be the strategy that Zoltan Istvan is following in California in his run for governor for 2026. So Zoltan Istvan was the founder of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, but he stepped down from any leadership roles within it in 2016. And that was when I became the chairman. But Zoltan has run for office since that time. He ran in 2018 for governor of California on a libertarian platform. Then he ran in 2020 in the primaries as a Republican, challenging Donald Trump. And now he's running as a Democrat. So we had a virtual enlightenment salon with him 2 weeks ago on June 15th, and we asked a lot of questions of him regarding both the substance and the strategy of his campaign. And his response was he thought that it would be more feasible for him to make inroads in California politics running as a Democrat, even though a lot of his ideas are not conventional Democratic Party ideas, and he challenges the orthodoxy of the Democratic Party in many respects. But he thinks this is a path that makes it likelier for him to get into the primary debates among the Democratic contenders and also maybe make it into, say, the top 3 or 5 Democratic primary candidates. So do you think someone like Zoltan is following the kind of dino-rhino strategy that you have been contemplating within the Pirate Party?
Yeah, I think that's a very viable strategy for the reasons that I stated earlier. A lot of people won't vote for an independent or an alternate party. I see when it comes to principles and things, what running in that party, we've seen for years that Republicans and Democrats, even those some that get elected, are not very in line with what you would consider a traditional Republican or a traditional Democrat. I mean, well, even Donald Trump is not a traditional Republican. I mean, he's looking practically like a Russian uh, communist right now, um, with what he's doing with uh, some of his unilateral tariffs and economic plans that he's pushing right now. So yeah, the being an unconventional candidate on the Republican or Democrat line, I think, can be a viable strategy, and it can get your ideas out there, and that's really what I think we're about.
Yes, and actually, this is relevant because when we provide the coalition proposal to our membership, we're also perhaps even in the same voting form going to ask a question about whether our members would endorse Zoltan's campaign for governor of California. And this could give us perhaps a cross endorsement possibility. So I think there will be some discussion and maybe even some heated discussion within the U.S. Transhumanist Party ranks about Zoltan and some of his specific ideas. But we have, since 2020 and our constitutional reform that took place in the latter month of that year, been open to potentially endorsing candidates from other political parties as long as they either explicitly welcome that endorsement, which Zoltan said that he would, or they advocate as part of their campaign rhetoric either the ideas of transhumanism or life extension or both. And Zoltan is willing to do that as well. So it will be interesting to, let's say, test out that possibility and see what our members think. But the coalition proposal also would open us to a lot more possibilities for endorsing candidates at the local and state levels, even federal non-presidential offices, if the Pirate Party has individuals who are willing to run either as pirates, as independents, or perhaps under the Rhino Dino strategy. But we've had some comments in our chat just now about that and the fact that there are unconventional candidates who frequently run on either the Republican or Democratic ballot lines because it's easier to do that. One of the people whom I supported early on in my political journey, let's say Ron Paul, was really a libertarian, but he ran instrumentally as a Republican, even though first in 1988 he ran as a libertarian, but in 2008, 2012, he ran as a Republican. And the Republican Party establishment fought tooth and nail to prevent him from getting the nomination, to the point where they changed their rules at the national convention to make the nomination process a cakewalk for the early primary leader in subsequent races, which is why Donald Trump, who had a slight plurality of votes early on, but the majority of Republicans disliked him as well at the time, if we remember the Never Trump movement, he was able to exploit those rules to take that early lead and secure the nomination with it without really much of a challenge from the other Republican candidates. So it is interesting also to observe how the alignments of the major parties can shift. And we've seen Donald Trump essentially capturing the Republican Party. Some of our viewers have very strong views on that. And some would even say, as John H. does, now they're a crime syndicate masquerading as a political party. With the Democrats, allegedly they're supposed to be the party of the resistance, but we're not sure if they have their act together. Luis Arroyo wonders what happened in New York with the primary, with the victory of Zoran Mamdani. Is this a blueprint for the Democratic Party's future? Is this part of a new left as far as social democracy goes? I will say I have some significant differences from Mamdani in terms of specific policy views, but it does seem like he won a fair election using the ranked choice method, and we need to respect that. Now, the New York financial elite is panicking about it, and it seems like both Andrew Cuomo and Eric Adams, who are more established figures, Cuomo seems to be more of an ideological big D Democrat. Eric Adams seems to be more of an opportunist, whom even Trump has tried to deal with, but Cuomo has been riddled with scandals. And I am not necessarily a person who would reflexively believe Me Too allegations. So I'm not going to say one way or the other that Cuomo is guilty, but Cuomo resigned previously because of those allegations, and now he's running again. So what does that tell you, Drew, about where the Democratic Party is at? Clearly, the Republican Party is now a Trumpian monolith, and that disturbs me and it disturbs you greatly. Is the Democratic Party standing for anything anymore?
I'm not sure if the Democratic Party has stood for anything for quite a while. I think that's part of why they lost in 2024. They don't have a direction. I think some of their top talking points are not what people are concerned with in their own lives. I've got my pride flag here flying behind me, and I am absolutely 100% behind LGBTQ rights. But I can tell you that there are a lot of issues related to the LGBTQ community that are losers when it comes to you turn off voters if that's your main message. And that's just a reality of 2025 right now. I don't think that's a good thing, but I think we need to be aware of that. I think Zoran ran an amazing race. He put in a ton of work. He knocked on doors. He talked to people. And I think that, if anything, is really the blueprint for moving forward. Is get out there in your community, talk to people, campaign. Don't just rely on advertising and like a handful of big events. Get out there and talk to people, be in your community, have lots of events, have lots of rallies, door to door if you think you need to. There's a lot of public parks all over the place that you can have events just out of the blue. But I think he did, to an extent, give a lot of people a blueprint of how you take on the establishment. And yeah, no, I'm with you on that. That I'm not on board with a lot of his potential policies. I think there are some things that he has proposed that are pretty silly, but that's not really what this is about. Honestly, with Cuomo and Adams, they are both corrupt to the core, and that's part of the problem. It isn't just Republicans that are corrupt to the core. They are not the only ones that are the crime syndicate, although they are, as you said, a monolith now. The Democratic Party establishment is just as much a problem as is the Republican Party. They just have turned into a bunch of lame ducks over the past couple of years. And honestly, that's why I think they've lost elections recently, that they didn't have direction. They didn't have a strong voice that was behind the people. They are traditionally supposed to be the party that is behind the people, behind labor, behind those that to help people. They're traditionally for entitlements, however you want to put that. helping the poor, helping, but none of that has come out. They don't have strong candidates. One of the only ones that you see that even is close to that talks about those things is Bernie Sanders, and he's not even really a Democrat. I think he's still an independent, even though he caucuses with them. So I think they lack direction, they lack strong leadership, and honestly, the Democratic Party right now, I think, is ripe for a new left takeover.
Very interesting. Now, I wonder also what your thoughts are on the emerging, let's call them the abundance faction within the Democratic Party. Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson wrote a book called Abundance, which essentially makes a lot of the arguments that transhumanists have been making in the past decade and a half, stating we're not building enough. We have obsolete infrastructure. We are not providing material opportunities for people to get ahead in life. Even though we have the technology, we have the resources to do it, we have a system that's gridlocked. And Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson describe it as a vetocracy, where various layers, both of government and of local activists, have stymied new construction, including of housing, which then precipitates the homelessness problem as well as the housing affordability crisis. And as you pointed out, a lot of the electoral rhetoric of Democrats in recent campaigns has been focused on issues that may be valid issues for a minority of the electorate, but do not resonate with the majority of the electorate. And Democrats have often overlooked the day-to-day struggles that a lot of Americans now face with the rising cost of living crisis, and they lack the material and infrastructural solutions to problems such as inflation. So do you think there's a possibility for some pragmatic alliances with this abundance faction as far as the use of technology and, let's say, the liberalization of material production and material construction can bring to improving the lives of a lot of everyday people?
I think that's the thing that the Republican Party is leaving behind, is the regular people. They're pushing out and only pushing for things for the elites. I mean, look at these proposed cuts to Medicare and Medicaid that are supposedly coming in this bill that they're going to vote on tomorrow. If that goes through, this is going to be a massive crisis in this country. We need to recognize that this is not a trickle down economy. It's a bottom up economy. If you don't have good workers and if you don't have people that can survive to be your base, the bottom of that pyramid is the people, is regular working class people. Working class people need to be able to make a living wage. They need to have decent working conditions. These policies that the Republican Party is pushing out are only going to result in disaster. And we see people like J.D. Vance talking about issues with the birth rate being low. I think part of the problem there is if you don't have living wages and the cost of living is insane, most people can't afford to have children, let alone raise them. So they're pushing the wrong way. And I think the Democratic Party, the New Left, the Abundance crowd, I think they have a lot of the right ideas. I think they have ideas of what's wrong. The solutions we'll see. I think that's where we have some debate to go. But I think what they're talking about problem-wise, I think they've nailed a lot of it.
Yes, thank you. And Mike Lazine writes, Drew is right on point, so he is loving what you're saying. And Mike believes that you and the rest of the Pirate Party are going to be a great asset for our collaboration. He also agrees with me. He writes, It infuriates me when I'm here in California with our high homelessness and see open land not being used for housing. Very immoral. And indeed, there are special interests that have been holding back new housing construction, especially in California, for a generation now. And it is shameful because a lot of people do still see Silicon Valley in particular as a place of opportunity. And these can even be highly skilled, capable people, but when they come in, no matter how much money they earn, they have to share a room in a dingy old apartment with 5 people and pay exorbitant rent to have that privilege. And that really sets back not even just working class Americans anymore, people who would be considered upper middle class Americans in any other generation. And I definitely agree with Josh Universe's statement. This is a broken system. And he also writes, certainly the threshold of effort and hard work needed to get to a comfortable financial position, especially in places like California, seems to be increasing significantly. Furthermore, it seems that it has become normalized for people to go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and buy now, pay later loans that cannot and should not be underwritten for such debt. Student loans are the most insidious of those because they can't even be discharged in bankruptcy. I would tell any young person, do not get student loans under any circumstances. Even if you have to take a longer path to get a college degree or whatever other training or certification you're looking for, you will be much better off financially if you don't start in a 6-figure hole that you cannot extricate yourself from, sometimes for decades. One of the best decisions I have made in terms of the college path that I chose was to avoid any student loans. And I can tell you that decision helps you decades down the road. So now,
Maddie's articles or something, wasn't it called Why Not to Get a PhD, or all the reasons not to get a PhD, that got really popular?
Reasons Not to Pursue a PhD has been my most popular YouTube video by far, over 176,000 views, and it was made in 2011. So it's still getting traction for a variety of reasons, but of course, debt avoidance is a big one. Now, Daniel Tweed pointed out in one of his comments that really the Democratic Party has had significant elements of corruption for a while. Democrats will never acknowledge how corrupt LBJ was, but Daniel says he will. So, Daniel, perhaps you could comment a bit more on that, on institutional corruption within the major political parties, as well as your thoughts about how to overcome it, how to challenge the duopoly more effectively and have these truths be acknowledged. Because yes, LBJ, I would say LBJ might have been a worse human being than Trump. And that's a kind of difficult statement to make, a difficult bar to surpass or go under, depending on one's perspective. But yes, unfortunately, the major political parties have had that kind of tendency for a while. But go ahead, Daniel.
Oh yeah, there's a whole panoply of conspiracy and. First of all, when he died, he had the equivalent of $120 million, in wealth built up, and he never, earned more than, I think $50,000 as a senator. So he was definitely doing all kinds of deals, including murder for hire. He had a personal hitman, Malcolm Wallace. He was either going to become president or he was going to go to jail, or that was basically what he was facing in 1963. And I can't believe how long it's taken for these kinds of facts to come to light. But yeah, and then, people even say FDR had some incredibly corrupt practices that, the Democrats are typically the party of Southern slavery. So, it's, I like it when we had the party, the Democratic Republicans versus the Whigs, maybe we could get back to that duopoly. That would be probably superior to what we have. Or, the libertarians versus the anarchists or socialists or syndicalists. There's all kinds of other political, spectra that should be in front of the public, that should be on the public menu. But again, it's going to be a struggle.
Yes. Very interesting and apt observations. And indeed, it saddens me how in the upper echelons of power, it often happens that very cynical operators gain control, and it ceases to be about ideas. It ceases to be about policies. It ceases to be about improving the human condition by looking at it through whatever lens one has, be it libertarian, socialist, transhumanist, anything else. These operators care more about securing their own power. I think that is at the root of some of the recent events in the Middle East, as I spoke during last Sunday's salon. The desire for one particular individual to hold on to power almost ignited a world war. John H. writes, Democrats are corrupt too because humans are corrupt. He thinks it's sheer arrogance for minor party types to act as if they're immune to corruption. So perhaps John thinks that if minor parties became major parties and became dominant in the political arena, they could also either become corrupt or become hijacked by corrupt actors, people who were already corrupt. I'm inclined to consider the latter to be a greater probability. So I don't think so much that power corrupts those who were not previously corrupt. I think power attracts the corrupt.
And another comment, there was a time when you wouldn't run because, hey, I think I'll run for office. Maybe I could, get some goodies. It was traditionally your friends around you would say, hey, you know what? You're a good person. You should be running for office. And they go, oh, who, me? But we need to get back to a culture where people push good people to be public servants, where people don't just say, oh, I could be a public servant and see what happens. And who knows, I could line my pockets. So yeah, that's I'd like to see a return to that, pushing people into public service that really are suited for it kind of culture.
Yes. And early on in American history, the figure of Cincinnatus was very much admired. So Cincinnatus was an early Roman military leader who repelled an invasion of the Gauls, and then he returned to till his fields. And they actually found him tilling his fields when the Gauls were invading, and they told him, well, we need you to defend Rome. And he kind of reluctantly agreed. He waged an effective defensive campaign, and then he stepped down voluntarily and returned to his fields. And that was held up as an ideal for the American founding generation and a few generations afterward. But rhetoric about Cincinnatus kind of faded away over time, and more of an institutional political class
and could I also
about instead.
It's probably good to mention the idea of sortition, where being a public servant is more like jury duty. I've mentioned this when I went to candidate forums during my city council runs. And, you get picked for jury duty kind of as a random factor. And maybe we should use this sortition system to pick our public servants more often. So just wanted to get that thought in. Thanks.
Yes, it's an interesting idea. But Drew, I would be interested in your thoughts about corruption in politics, how it manifests itself, especially at the highest echelons, and what can be done to protect against it. Can you have a situation emerge where the dominant political faction or group is actually not corrupt, is actually principled and acting not for its own aggrandizement or enrichment, but to carry out a program that they actually think will provide broader benefits?
Well, I think that requires, like I said earlier, that requires vigilance from other members of that political party. If a party has principles, it is the duty of the other members of that party to make sure that their elected leadership or nominated candidates actually represent that. And sure, those candidates can get elected for a term or two, but if they're not upholding their end of the bargain, so to speak, that political party should be there to speak out against them and say, look, you're not holding up our principles. You are no longer, you don't represent us. I think in a long enough timeline, money and power does corrupt. And that's what we see a lot with the elites, especially. And that's going back to what we were talking about earlier, where the problem with building, especially in zoning issues, that's the elites and the NIMBYs all getting together to say, no, I don't want that here. You know, I have power, I have money that I can fight you with. And I just see that as one of the biggest problems is we have a system that does that we idealize the integrity, but nobody enforces it. There's no recourse. There's no consequences for people that are corrupt. I mean, and that's why the whole system is corrupt at this point, because unless it's very criminal and you're on the wrong side, you're not gonna get called on the carpet. I mean, we were talking about Eric Adams earlier, and he is very corrupt. And it just so happens that he's not the right party. So now we see Donald Trump, basically twisting his arm over whether they're going to continue to prosecute him or not. And that puts you even in a worse situation. It's essentially like toe the line or you go to jail because you did bad things in the past. And I can't believe that he's even a viable candidate at this point in New York City, other than knowing that New York City is always been very corrupt. That's the old Tammany Hall stuff. It's always been controlled by the elite with power. And that's not even talking about any political ideology. It's just the elite and the money and the owners of capital essentially have been running the show. And we need integrity. We need integrity, and we need to enforce it. We need to, if you don't keep your integrity, we need to stand up and say it and keep those people from being nominated again. I mean, we got to stop it voting for incumbents too. That's another thing that I think we need to do.
Indeed, and there is a huge pro-incumbent bias even among the ordinary electorate, where we've already mentioned people will reflexively vote for a party line. They'll also reflexively vote for incumbents, and there are commonly circulated survey results that the overall popularity rating of Congress as an institution is abysmally low. It's one of the lowest, but the popularity ratings of a particular elected congressperson in their district seem to be fairly high, in part because they try to bring the goodies to the special interests that dominate that district. So if, for instance, a representative is elected from a district that manufactures some very specific part for the space shuttle, and this was actually the case in reality. They tried to make the space shuttle a pork project where some components would be made in each of the 50 states, and they didn't care how expensive it was or how ineffective some of the components were. What they cared for was to provide enough of, let's say, pork to each state delegation of representatives so that they would continue to support the space shuttle project. Now, I am saddened that the space shuttle was discontinued, but one reason why it was discontinued was that the manner of funding it, the manner of producing the components, became fiscally unsustainable. But I'm sure each of these representatives that brought jobs and resources to their particular jurisdiction to have that set of components built there was rewarded for it by the voters who might not have understood the bigger picture either. Now, Mike Lazine writes that he agrees with me. Power attracts corrupt people who are looking for favors. If you do this for me, I will do this for you. Daniel Tweet writes, there are studies that show that sociopathic personality types are highly drawn to positions of authority. John H. writes, a barrier to any form of democracy is the willingness of a sufficient number of the citizens to take part in their own government. It is appalling how few people even bother to vote. And Mike Lazine writes, yes, it's awfully hard to turn down money when your job is not to you paying a decent wage. That is how, for instance, law enforcement officers become compromised. There are a lot of legislative positions that don't pay very well either. So the concept of a so-called citizen legislature is that, especially at the state level, one could get a nominal sum per legislative session. It's not enough to live off of. So often, not only do these people have other jobs outside of the legislative function, which in itself might be fine, but they are looking to use their position in office as a stepping stone to something else. So they might not be making a lot of money as a legislator, but they are meeting a lot of lobbyists, and they have the opportunity to vote on a lot of bills. And they're also, of course, getting campaign contributions, but implicitly, they could be made to know that, oh, after they're termed out of their legislative roles, there's a, let's say, lucrative position in the private sector waiting for them. And they already know some of the people who might be willing to provide that position if, of course, they behave themselves in a way that is beneficial to that special interest. So that is a huge incentive problem, and people might come into the system being idealistic and actually wanting to make a difference. But over time, these pressures, these perverse incentives get the better of them. So it is a challenge to overcome this set of poor incentives that results in corruption, but hopefully our respective parties and our coalition could make a difference in this regard. Any comments on this, Drew?
Yeah, I want to circle back to something we were talking about earlier. So we were mentioning the sort of disconnect with the Libertarian Party during the election, how Trump came in, and there was it all came clear to me when Jason posted one video that was talking about this discontent in the Libertarian Party, and there was a guy speaking named I believe Josh Equal, who was putting together a project called Project Liberal. And I'm interested in what they're up to right now. I was going to bring it up just as a source of another seeking out allies we mentioned. And I'm looking in their server that I'm in, and who do I see as a member but Mr. Gennady Solyarov too. I'm wondering what your thoughts on what they're up to are. You might have been following them more than I have.
Yeah, I've been following them kind of peripherally, but it seems to have also arisen out of a group of individuals who are disillusioned with the direction that the Libertarian Party has gone in. And I've listened to some of their commentary as well. I think some of their observations about the disintegration of the Libertarian Party resonates with what we've talked about here. But Drew, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think we're talking about the Liberal Party that has become the Liberal Party. So yeah, there are a lot. That's mostly a lot of people that are expats from the Libertarian Party. There are some decent people in that group, but going back to the state representative and the corruption there, I think part of how that happens is as a representative, you are trying to do your best for the people in your district, and it becomes very easy to get switched into a mode of when the lobbyists come in and say we want to bring jobs in here, but we need this or we need that or we need a law that allows us to do X, and it is a bit of a conflict when you're trying to be a good representative to see these good things, good economic activity that could potentially be coming into your district. And I think it's like balancing, it's really towing a fine line of what's good for the district versus going a little over to the dark side and a little more corrupt. So I think it's tough, and I think it's probably very easy for most people to just roll over that line and just go with it.
Yes. And there is a vulnerability in that. I think sometimes we forget, let's say, the human aspect of this. Even somebody who holds a position of elected office, a position that is seen as being powerful, actually faces a lot of practical constraints. And they also can see themselves as, well, I'm just one person. What can I do when there are all of these forces? And I can play along with them, or I'll lose my campaign funding. I'll be defeated in the next primary, or they'll launch a smear campaign against me, because a lot of politicians are victims of smear campaigns, and sometimes it is not what it seems. Sometimes maybe they are guilty of something. They do have some kind of metaphorical skeleton in their closet, but so do most of their other colleagues. But they are the ones facing the fallout for that. And sometimes, very conveniently, it happens right before an election, or right before a primary, or right before some other development. And there's a whole field of opposition research that exists, and I wish it didn't exist. I hope it can be eliminated at some point. But the purpose of this opposition research field is for certain political players to have dirt on their opponents to deploy strategically. So not just whenever it's found, but sometimes they might hold on to it for years.
Yeah, I think too, what you're talking about there is, I think one of the flaws in our system right now, that has become an issue, is the fact that most state reps and U.S. reps are only in office for 2 years. So it is a constant need to raise funds for your reelection. You're always campaigning. You never get downtime to actually do what you want to do. I understand why the founders thought that a 2 years would be better, because they didn't think that we'd get so caught up in incumbents. But at the same time, the way the system has grown up around us, a 2-year term is not long enough for somebody to be able to be brave enough to step out of line. And I think that makes things very difficult for anybody that's caught up in the traditional. It's a constant cycle. I constantly need to be getting donations for my campaign that's coming up in 18 months, because even though I just got elected, so I can't make my donors angry. I can't make my constituents angry. I can't get away with anything. And that just keeps this cycle of corruption going. And I mean, I'm very scared about the Republic at this point. I don't know how we're going to survive some of these decisions that have come down. I think we are in very much danger. And the bright side of that might be that, not so much at the state level, but maybe at the federal level, there might be some room for reform if the people can stand up and make it happen. We'll see.
Yes, indeed.
Well
We
said,
shall
man.
see.
I agree. Well said.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think there's so much flux at the federal level. On the one hand, we're seeing some unprecedented unilateral actions, many of which are intrusions on people's liberties, certainly tariffs, or launching a unilateral military action without even consulting Congress, are deeply troubling. On the other hand, some of those actions are very short-lived, and they may be just as easy to reverse as they are to initiate. And I can definitely see our time horizons compressing. Certainly a month ago, we wouldn't have thought that there would be massive riots in Los Angeles, followed by a military confrontation in the Middle East that may have escalated into a broader war. Fortunately, it didn't. But on May 29th, 2025, who would have thought that this is what we would be dealing with? And, assassinations of lawmakers, too. We didn't anticipate that coming, and that is troubling as well. It's a sign of increasing polarization, destabilization. Certain marginal actors who would have been, let's say, more emotionally volatile or disturbed people to begin with, but they might have behaved themselves in a calmer political climate. Now they're essentially getting riled up and motivated to inflict deadly harm, and that's a tragedy for everyone involved. Now, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing that we do need to remember, there's two things. One, the United States in its current form is the oldest continuously operating under its constitution in the world. Every other country in the world has had some sort of new government since we've formed the Constitution. And let's also not forget that this is not the first government under the United States. We have failed in the past, and we created the system that we have now. I think we may be in a situation right now where our current republic may be failing. And we've kept it a long time. Thank you, Ben Franklin. We've kept it a long time. But I think we might be reaching the edges of what this system can handle. I hear all the time, well, the founders never foresaw X. The founders never foresaw this, and while we do have a flexible system, I don't think in the current climate that there's any way that significant constitutional reforms outside of a whole Article 5 convention is going to put reforms in that need to be done. I would like to go back to things the way that they were over the last couple of years. I think it's not a bad system if we can obey the rules. I mean, that's government and elected officials can obey the rules, but I think we're seeing flaws. We're seeing holes in the armor, and there's no shame in letting a government fail. It's happened in the past. It's happened all around the world. People get together, we make it better.
But there are strategies we can apply from the computer universe. There's a concept called fail closed or fail open. And if our republic is going to fail, we want it to fail open. We want it to fail in such a way that people who believe in freedom can go off and form intentional communities like Atlas Island or experiments. Like every state was supposed to be a laboratory of democracy in the founders' vision. So that would be a vision of failing open. And I agree. I am worried. The founders were pretty smart, but I think that we may have outsmarted them with all the quirks and kinks that have happened recently.
Like having an interstate commerce clause that all of a sudden we have all these administrations just because they regulate interstate commerce, and that's the one that bugs me. But yeah, I agree. We need to fail open. I'm interested in what's going on with some of these startup cities. Maybe see some more competition among the little mini startup nations. Patrick Friedman made an interesting point that resonated with me. While I agree with you, Drew, we've had the longest constitution. Patrick also said, can you imagine running Windows 95 right now? Like, there's been constant updates since then. We've got an old operating system, and there are little issues like control of the military where things are breaking down like that. And then the debt, I don't think we ever figured out a way to really deal with. That's one thing that worries me about how we're going to fail open is what happens with the debt. I've never heard anyone talk about it. And the only thing I see is printing money, which makes me think I got to get more Bitcoin. But I don't see how we get out of the debt other than printing our way out of it. But yeah,
well, a full failure of the United States government that owes that debt could, and a replacement entity is one way that, I mean, it's happened in other places around the world that go into massive amounts of debt, and the only way to work through it was, well, that, it's essentially a bankruptcy where it goes up. I don't know. The debt is also another thing that is very bad and is also looming very large right now. So I don't know. I don't know how we can. The best thing I can say is, as your comment about Windows 95, there are still a lot of legacy things in Windows 11 that still stick around. So while we have new operating systems, we do also have a lot of legacy. And I kind of hope that if we do end up forming a new republic here in the United States, that we do have a decent legacy of things moving forward. I think we have a lot of good ideas in that Constitution. I think a lot of the mechanisms are what is the problem.
Since we're talking about economics, could I put in a good word for the trusty goldback? This is actually 1/1000th of an ounce of 24 karat gold. It's printed in 8 states now make them. This one's from Florida, but I think New Hampshire is one state, Nevada, South Dakota. But yeah, I've been giving these out to merchants because you can get listed on their website as a merchant who accepts goldbacks. And they come in different denominations, and the different denominations are slightly larger size. So it's great for disabled, visually impaired people. They can tell, oh, that's a bigger bill. That must be a bigger goldback, So, private money, alternative currencies exist. And I wholeheartedly encourage goldback.com is the website if you want to check out goldbacks.
Indeed. So it was interesting in our chat, John H. pointed out that the U.S. is actually the second oldest continuous republic. The first is San Marino. Now, there are more than 11 people who live in San Marino. According to the Wikipedia entry, the population is just over 34,000 in 2025. So please feel free to read up on the history of San Marino. They claim that their republic started in 301 CE, but they really became independent from the Papal States in 1291. Still, it is a longer history than the US, but of course it is a smaller population, and they've been able to essentially stay out of the conflicts of the Italian city-states and afterward maintain their independence through the world wars. But the US has a greatly larger scale, several orders of magnitude. And with that come its own challenges that San Marino doesn't face. Now, John wonders also in terms of failing, fail how? Fail to authoritarianism or fail to some form of anarchy? And that is a vulnerability whenever an existing government collapses, whenever, no matter what system one has, if that system used to be perceived as legitimate and now is no longer, whether one used to have a king or a republic, what have you, and now it's not clear what is legitimate anymore, and there are various claimants to being the legitimate government. It could be that some of those claimants are better than what preceded them, but they're going to be extremely vulnerable. And this has been the unfortunate tendency of political revolutions throughout history. Initially, some of those revolutions might even start with idealists. So the French Revolution began with relatively modest reform efforts, and there was an idealistic group in the Estates General that proposed the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen, and very few of us today would disagree with that declaration. And they essentially just wanted a constitutional monarchy where human rights were respected to a greater extent. But in just the space of a few years, these more sensible reformers were crowded out and often physically killed by the Jacobins, who were bloodthirsty, power hungry. They just wanted to smash and destroy everything. And increasingly, they turned on one another And eventually, even some of the Jacobins realized, oh, if we continue this, then we will get killed by our former compatriots. So we need to rein this back and create the Directory, which lasted for 4 years, essentially almost 5 years, until Napoleon came to power with the consulate. But by 1815, this all came full circle back to the Bourbon monarchy, because at least there was some greater longevity with that, some greater perceived legitimacy. And when everything else failed, the people of France just returned to that monarchy. So I do think we need to be careful in terms of how any large-scale reform is structured, so that whatever arrangement succeeds this one maintains the perception of legitimacy, and there aren't warlords or very ruthless political actors seeking to overthrow it. Jennifer Hughes writes, yes, we definitely want to try to stay away from any system crash and evolve to something that benefits everyone. And I agree. I've said before, politically, I prefer evolution to revolution. But what are your thoughts on that, Drew?
So I think in the United States, I don't see us devolving into anarchy. We may devolve into a bit of a war, but I don't see us devolving into anarchy, mainly because we still have, most of our states are still pretty solid. Our states still have pretty much, the rule of law still works in most of our states. I mean, I think there's places where some places are a little sketchy, but a lot of our states are still solid republics that still mostly work for the people. And when I say mostly, I mean it's still that status quo of 10, 20, 30 years ago. Most states are still pretty decent in that status quo. I think looking to the states to help maintain an order if there is a failure of the federal government, or even just a vote of no confidence. I mean, I think we're seeing some of that loss of confidence from the Supreme Court, from some of the stuff that's coming out of them. I think once people really start losing confidence, I mean, obviously we're losing confidence in the executive branch, because that's an absolute mess. We're losing confidence in the legislative branch because they've done nothing. And we're losing confidence in the judicial branch, at least at the top, because they're endorsing a lot of this. And when the people lose confidence in things, it's not gonna, it won't be long until it falls. And I think it is a very scary proposition. Don't get me wrong, I am not looking forward to it, but it sort of looks like that's the way we're heading. And what I'm hoping is that the governors and the state legislators can maintain some semblance of a decent status quo, however that is in each state, through this process. And I don't see it necessarily devolving into like full-on anarchy.
So it could, in effect, become a more decentralized system over time, where normalcy is maintained at the state level, to some extent at the local level. And indeed, a lot of the decisions that most directly affect people are made at those levels today. It's just that the federal government has an influence over the overarching policy. But if that influence were to be diminished somewhat, perhaps day to day, not that much would change. But go ahead, Daniel.
Oh, it's pretty easy for people to form a government. When you think about it, two people on a boat, one of them wants to sleep and one of them stands watch. They're right there. That's a contract to agree to use deadly force, in essence. So that's probably the simplest example of, and a government really is just a monopoly on deadly force in a limited geographic area. But just something as simple as two people on a boat with one standing watch. Boom. That's like the most essential government you can have, probably. Maybe that's got some pirate party resonance.
Indeed. Well, the pirate ships historically have had their own pirate codes, which we discussed with Mitch during our previous salon. where these were agreements that the pirates would enter into. Even though they were outlaws, they still made agreements with one another about how the ship was to be governed. So yes, governance doesn't necessarily imply a government as traditionally constituted, and governance attempts are going to happen with or without a traditional government. The question for me, and this is why I'm not an anarcho-capitalist, is what policies are pursued. So I actually care less about the form of governance, though that is important to some extent, but I care a lot more about the content of governance, what the governing entity does, whether it's a king or a republican form of government with representatives, or a direct democracy, or an oligarchy, or a pirate ship where there's a pirate code. I care about what these people do within their governance structures.
And I think rule of law is very important, and that's what we're losing right now. We're losing confidence in rule of law, and we're seeing rule of law being completely ignored by the federal government. And that's not a crack in most states. Most states are still pretty solid when it comes to rule of law. But that's what it is with on the pirate ships. Your compact, your constitution, your whatever you want to call it, your pirate code for the ship, it's a compact between people to follow a set of rules. This is how we do things. Both of our parties have our constitutions and our bylaws. That's how we operate. We operate within those rules. I think, and there's a lot of that around in other organizations. Many organizations have constitutions and bylaws, not necessarily corporations. Even though a lot of corporations do have those, they don't necessarily follow them. They do whatever they want. But a lot of nonprofits, a lot of civic organizations, those sort of things all operate on bylaws. And it's a willingness to follow those rules that keeps us from devolving into anarchy. And as long as it's voluntary, we keep it voluntary, that's the best way. But sometimes it doesn't work that way because there's always bad actors.
Indeed, and it is the bad actors that we have to be vigilant about, as we have discussed. So we have a question from Josh Universe. He wonders, how do you plan to engage with our party, the USTP, in a mutually beneficial way during times when there are not elections? So we talked about the political coalition and cross-endorsing candidates as one function of the coalition. What about any of the interim periods? Not that there aren't many periods when someone isn't campaigning for office, but hypothetically, what are some other ideas for collaboration or engagement that you have in mind?
I got to cut in real quick and say I'm not in your Discord server, and I live on Discord. So if we're talking about collaboration, I feel like that's one of the first things, is be able to share some members between our servers and really get that trust going between our members, so we're working together like a group. When I feel like this is the first time I've met you, but if you're on Discord, I can really see your full personality over time evolve, rather than just like a 2-hour sort of face-to-face limited speaking. So I would love to get our Discord servers set up as partners, or anything you guys would be willing to do.
I think we can definitely work to do that. I don't see an issue with that. I think the other pirates would be amenable to that. I think the other thing I will say as to our Discord server, I'm just one person. I'm not the pirate party. I'm just the captain. I just help steer the ship. I still help keep us in line. I keep us rolling in our meetings. Honestly, the real heart of the pirate party is the other pirates, and all of our activity is in the Discord. That's where you meet all the other pirates. We have lots of ideas about things, and if you want to get on and talk about things, yeah, the Discord is our best spot right now. We have talked about trying to roll into other things, but Discord right now is where the action is at. Speaking to during times when there are not elections. Now, is he just talking about when there aren't elections coming up? Because every year there's elections. There's elections every year. Now,
yes, I think that's what he meant, essentially. But it could be interpreted as, well, what if there's no like large midterm election or presidential election as well?
I think that's where we go back to cross-pollination with endorsements and more engagements like this, having more shared streams. I think we can talk about issues. We can highlight candidates on both of our platforms. And when we don't have candidates, we can just talk about the issues and how each of our parties, how we agree on things and how we disagree on things, because we're friends. We're friends, and we're adults, and we're not like the traditional political parties where the other side is non-human. So yeah, that's I just see more engagement, like things like this, that we keep the dialogue open. And I think any publicity is good publicity. So.
Indeed. Well, thank you for that answer. And we have another question from Tamara Thomas, who is our ambassador in Hungary. What do you think about running for offices in our local governments in the states to empower us from the overarching and barbaric federal rule? So I think you touched on that a bit, Drew, in the sense that the local government positions have lower barriers to entry. How would you essentially evaluate the strategy of a predominantly state and local focus, given that each of our parties has endorsed presidential candidates in the past? Of course, the Pirate Party has endorsed Vermin Supreme, and Vermin Supreme knows very much what he is about, and he wants to, let's say, inject a very different kind of discourse into American politics, I think, through humor and satire, showing some truths about the American political system that couldn't be expressed in other respects. And of course, we've had presidential candidates since 2016. Zoltan Istvan was our first candidate, then Charlie Cam in 2020, and Tom Ross in 2024. Zach is wearing the Tom Ross 2024 campaign t-shirt. And in terms of the probability of our presidential candidates winning, it's close to zero right now due to all of the obstacles that we discussed. But at the local level, somebody could win. So do you see that as the most likely practical way forward, where we would have a presidential candidate essentially because that's what a good minor political party should do, but our greatest focus in terms of actually achieving electoral success should be at the local level, maybe at the state level if we're lucky?
Right. Yeah. So a presidential candidate every 4 years is a platform. That's what it is for independents and third parties. It's the time when the most people pay attention to politics. So to not have a nominee for president is definitely a failure in my view. You should always have a nominee for president. Now, how much you do to get them on the ballot, how much you do to do publicity, the publicity is what you should be looking for. I think that's because that's where we get the attention. We get new members. I've seen in the Libertarian Party and I've seen in the Pirate Party, the presidential years bring more new people than any other time. So it is a matter of getting your voice out there because the most people are paying attention. The way to actually change things is to start from the bottom up, to run those state house elections, the mayor or city council elections, even things, like I said earlier, that I'm elected in my local precinct. There's auditor positions in Pennsylvania. That are elected positions where you can help keep the local municipality honest in its fiscal standing. So yes, at the bottom, to be at the bottom and move up, that's one of the best strategies to actually change things. And honestly, as to the things that we were just discussing, this fear that the federal government may be at the point of no return. And like I said, I'm looking to the states to keep things from actually devolving into a very bad state. And yeah, getting elected or finding people that are good people to elect that match up with our principles is a very good thing. And that is one of the ways that we can all kind of survive this nightmare that is happening right now in the United States.
Indeed. It seems that it is up to decent people at levels of government that are closer to the people to maintain the good parts of governance that we rely on for everyday life to be stable and prosperous and full of opportunity for relatively ordinary individuals to move ahead in life. Daniel Tweed writes, local politics is still underappreciated, in his opinion. And it's been said to some extent all politics is local. I think people who are closest to the reality on the ground often understand what Friedrich Hayek, the great Austrian economist, called the circumstances of time and place. So some federal politician may not be aware of even what specific challenges people in a different state, a state that this person didn't come from, are facing, and what some of the possible solutions to those challenges might be. Certainly, if, for instance, there's some issue that is specific to farmers in Idaho, I wouldn't have a whole lot of input on it either. I wouldn't have enough awareness as compared to perhaps certain people who live in Idaho and are close to those farmers and know what they're facing. But of course, it's a question then of whether those people are philosophically principled and would have the kinds of solutions that would genuinely make a positive difference in solving that problem without imposing costs or externalities onto everybody else. So that's also a challenge that any sort of large extended republic has to face. San Marino probably has fewer of those problems because of its 34,000 people, but there are so many differences geographically, regionally, culturally within this country, and a truly representative government does have to represent all of the people and figure out approaches, solutions that work for everybody without harming or marginalizing anybody, or at least preventing that outcome for as many people as possible. So Mike Lazine points out that thanks to Zoltan's immortality bus and him personally, that is what helped him come on board to the USTP. So publicity done right can grow third parties. And this is what running a presidential candidate is about at this stage in our evolution. So I think you're quite correct about that, Drew. It is about getting publicity. It is about getting visibility from people who might not have noticed us otherwise. So now I want to give Art Ramon the opportunity to ask a question, and then we'll have a few others from our YouTube audience. So Art Ramon, please go ahead.
Yeah, speaking of visibility, I remember the Trump's House of Weed when he was on Saturday Night Live. It was pretty funny. I had an acquaintance that worked for a congressman here in Arizona, and he was being investigated by the FBI for some sort of wrongdoing. And they investigated him also because he was like the accountant. So he was investigated by the FBI, and eventually they didn't get him for anything, but he went bankrupt because of it. So now with, the FBI and Cash Patel, they could use the FBI to bankrupt campaigns and candidates. So that's something that worries me. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think we're already seeing that that federal law enforcement is being weaponized right now, so far against senators and congresspeople. Yeah, and that's the other thing too. Is your point there is that just an investigation or charges that have come, that even if they're false charges and you end up beating them, it will cost you everything to fight that stuff. How do we combat that? I don't know. With a federal government that is weaponized to the extent that it is now, I think I could potentially see a weaponized FEC. I think right now that I think the target would be more on the Democratic Party than independents and third parties at this point, because they're going to be going for the bigger fish. But yeah, absolutely, I could see fighting in an FEC investigation, and the rules in federal election, in the Federal Election Commission, the rules for fundraising and stuff are very easy to make a mistake. And if you're gonna get jammed up on just one little mistake because the system has been weaponized to that extent, it can become a little bit dangerous. So what I would say to that is, anybody getting involved in a federal election at this point needs to make sure that all of their I's are dotted and their T's are crossed, and they have people working in that campaign that they absolutely trust. That way, even if you do get involved in something like that, that's the best way that you can avoid going to jail. I mean, I guess there's no other way around that. And it's going to be difficult with a federal government like it is. That if they want to come after us, it's going to be difficult to defend ourselves. It's going to cost a lot of money, and possibly our jobs, and then possibly, can absolutely ruin our lives. I mean, your local cops can do the same thing to you. I see that too. You get a false arrest, or you get arrested for doing something that isn't even against the law, but they make up charges. Like, come on, disorderly conduct is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard of, but it's charged and convicted all the time, and people go to jail. So there's a lot of reform that needs to happen, and it's a scary time right now.
Yeah, I wasn't sure which congressman this was, but I asked ChatGPT, and it says that it was a Republican, Rick Renzi, for Arizona's first congressional district, and he was investigated in 2008. He eventually was prosecuted for land swap scheme and some other things. But yeah, he went to jail in 2013. It looks like, but he was pardoned by Trump in 2021. So that's interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, and indeed, Trump has complained about essentially the legal system being weaponized against him and his supporters, but he may be doing the same thing as well. And this again seems to be a tendency of corrupt players within the political system. Daniel Tweed points out that Nixon weaponized the IRS against his enemies list. There have been complaints about Democrats doing the same thing in the 2010s when they were in power. And again, it shows the vulnerabilities of this system, and it shows how incumbent players when a challenger becomes too much of a threat, are not necessarily going to play by their own rules. They're going to try to distort and abuse the processes within the system to play roles that weren't intended for them according to the rules, but roles that are more nefarious, like using the judicial system against political opponents, which shouldn't happen no matter who the incumbents are or who the opponents are. That's not what the judicial system is for. Now, we have 5 minutes remaining in our salon today. This has been a fascinating conversation, and we are going to meet with the Pirate Party at 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time today to further hash out the details of the coalition so that we have a proposal to bring before our members for a vote. But in the time that we have remaining, Drew, would you like to talk a bit more about the coalition and your ideas regarding it, and perhaps some of what both of our parties' members could expect from it?
Yeah, I think ultimately, I think we need to just, the ultimate goal of this coalition is to grow it beyond just just our two parties, so that we can grow a much larger coalition to be a force in politics here in the United States. The form that takes, that's not something I'm pushing myself. I think my members have their visions. Your members have visions. I don't think it's my place to actually tell us where we're going. I just see us as having a very good working relationship moving forward, and I'm here to help that move along. And I see good things in the future for both of our parties, and potentially other parties that may join us in this coalition. And I look forward to helping us make it work.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Drew. So the Pirate Party meetings are streamed on YouTube as well. The U.S. Pirate Party has a YouTube channel, so please check it out. And there will be a YouTube chat for that meeting. We're still trying to decide on a name for the coalition. So we have some suggestions for the names that have been circulated, and I'll just read them out briefly. So one of them is the Third Party Coordination Cell, or the Third Party Coalition Cell. Another set of names is, well, a set of variations on All Hands. So All Hands Future, All Hands on Deck Alliance, All Hands on Deck Coalition, All Hands on Deck Futurists. There is a name that I like a lot, Coalition for a Free Future. Another variant that has been proposed is United for a Free Future, or just Free Future. And there are a variety of other names as well. So we're trying to come up with a name that means something in particular, so it's not just something bland or generic, but would also be inclusive of the major values that both of our parties stand for, and that other minor parties that join the coalition are also going to align with. So this would be a formulation that would pose a meaningful challenge to the duopoly, and wouldn't just be co-opted by, let's say, establishment types that just want a different label to run under. So think of something that the transhumanists would resonate with, that the pirates would resonate with, that a lot of other minor parties would resonate with, but perhaps not Andrew Cuomo or Eric Adams, who are probably going to run as independents, but I don't think we want them in our coalition. Sorry, Andrew Cuomo and Eric Adams, but you're just not a good fit for us. But the rest of those of us who are interested in challenging the duopoly please give this coalition proposal some thought. Take part in the meeting with the Pirate Party. Join the YouTube stream there. And as always, live long and prosper.